Simon Says subscribe and click on the bell icon to receive notifications.
In this and the next couple of lessons, we're going to take a look at how we can split data in Excel. And having the ability to split data up is a really important skill to learn. And it's something that comes up so frequently. Now, there are multiple different ways in Excel that you can do this. And we're going to start out in this lesson by taking a look at the oldest method, and that is text to columns. So let's take a look at our first example. Now notice over here in column A, I have a little bit of information that's been imported in from an external system. Now we only have a few records. This might be tens of thousands of rows long, but this is how the data has been imported into Excel. You can see that we have multiple pieces of information contained within the same cell. So we have the employee name, then a comma, then we have their job title, then a comma, then their department, then a comma, and then their salary. Now, my boss has come to me and he said, I don't like the way this report is structured. Instead of having all of the information contained within one cell, because it's really hard to read and analyze, I want you to go in and break this data up into different columns. So we want one column that shows the employee name, one column that shows the job title, one that shows the department, and one that shows the salary. Now, as I mentioned, there are numerous different methods that you can use to do this, but text to columns, whilst an older method, is still very valid. So all we would need to do here is select the data that we want to split up, go to the Data tab, and in the Data Tools group, we have a big old text to columns button. Now, if we click on text to columns, it's going to open up this little text to columns wizard. And the first thing we need to tell Excel is how our data is separated. So notice here that each field in my data is separated by a comma, not a comma space, just a comma. Now, when we have a little character like this, so this might be a comma, it could be a space, it could be a tab, it could be a semicolon, we refer to those as delimiters. So when we're choosing our data type, we want to split the data based on the delimiter. So we're going to select this top option and click on Next. We then move on to step 2, where it allows us to specify what our delimiter is that's splitting up each piece of information. Now, the default is tab, and you can see in the data preview, if I keep tab selected, it's not going to split those columns. And that's because we have a comma instead. So I'm going to deselect tab and we're going to choose comma. Now, if you had your data being separated using a delimiter that isn't one of these 4, you could choose the other option and simply type it in. Now that I've selected comma, notice in the data preview, it's now actually splitting those columns at the correct point. We can then click on Next. And if we want to choose our column data format, we can go through each column and choose that from here. Now, there are some occasions where I might do this. For example, I might specify that this is text, and this is text, and this is also text, and this one is just general. We can then choose our destination cell. So currently, if I was just to click on Finish just here, you can see the destination is cell A4. So it means it's going to start breaking up the columns in cell A4. Now, I don't want it to do that. I actually want it to split over in this little table that runs from column C to F. So I'm going to click the little up arrow and I'm just going to select cell C4 instead, and then click on Finish. And check it out, like magic, it has split up that data without too many problems. Of course, you might have to go in and maybe reapply some formatting, so let's apply some currency formatting just there. But really nice and straightforward. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, that's fine, but what if the delimiter that separates each of these pieces of information is inconsistent? Maybe we have a comma, and then maybe we have a semicolon or something like that. Well, in a few lessons' time, I'm going to show you one of the newer Excel functions which allows us to deal with that very nicely. For the time being, let's take a look at one more example using text to columns. Now, this dataset should look reasonably familiar. It's the one that we imported. But I have made a little change to this just to illustrate text to columns again. Notice in column A, instead of just housing the information for the country, it also has the product in brackets after it. Now, ideally, you don't want to have two pieces of information in the same column. Instead, I'd want a country column and also a product column. So we're going to split this up using text to columns. Now, to do this, I want to add in another column, Control-Shift+ or Control+, depending on your keyboard, because I need to have room for all of my products to be listed in here. So now that we've done that, I'm going to select my data, Control-Shift-Down arrow, and I'm going to do Control-Backspace to jump back up to the top. We're going to go to the Data tab. I'm going to choose Text to Columns. Now I'm going to choose delimited again, because what are we going to use to separate our data? Well, I'm going to use the first open bracket just here. So we're going to choose delimited, click on Next, and we don't have brackets listed underneath our delimiters. So this is where we can use the other option, and we can just say that we want to split at that first open bracket. Let's click on Next. Now the final thing to define here is the destination. So currently it's going to split this into cell A2. Now in this case it's fine, because I want the country to be in cell A2 and then I want the product to be in cell B2. So let's just leave it on A2, click on Finish. It's recognizing that there's already data in column A. It's fine. I want to overwrite that with just the country. Let's click on OK, and you can see it splits that up really nicely. Now notice something just here. When we split at the first open bracket, it actually deletes that first open bracket during the split process, but it's left this trailing open bracket. So I want to remove the bracket from column B, and this is simply a case of using Find and Replace. So we can select the column, Control F. We're going to go to the Replace tab, and we're going to say find the closing bracket and replace it with nothing. So let's choose Replace All, and that's a really quick way of just getting rid of that. We can then simply add our column header, which is Product, and we've split up our data using text to columns extremely quickly. In the previous lesson, we saw how we can split up data across columns using the Text to Columns utility in Excel. And as I mentioned, that is a really old piece of functionality. It's been around in Excel since the dawn of time. So let's go to the opposite end of the spectrum and take a look at one of the brand new functions that we have available in Excel 365 that allows us to split text across columns in a much more flexible way. And that is the TEXTSPLIT function. And I have to say, this is probably one of my favorite functions that was released recently in Excel. Previous to the TEXTSPLIT function, if we wanted to split data up, we could do that using a combination of different text functions, such as left, right, mid, and find. But if you needed to split something up that was a little bit more complex, these formulas were really difficult to put together. Fortunately, Microsoft listened to all of the feedback and have now provided us with a much easier function to use. And I have 4 examples here because there are so many different ways that you can use this. So let's start out with example 1, and we're going to start really basic. So again, we have a cell that contains 4 different pieces of information: the employee name, their job title, their department, and their salary. And it's all contained within one cell. And each piece of information is separated with a comma, and that is the same in every single cell, so our delimiter is consistent. Now when we have a consistent delimiter, our job is really easy, particularly using TEXTSPLIT. So if we go over here, what I can do is I can type in equals, and we're going to choose TEXTSPLIT, and we have a few different arguments. Notice that the ones in square brackets, those are optional. The first argument is the text we want to split. So we'll find that in cell A6, comma. What is our column delimiter? So this is where we just specify the delimiter that we want to split at. And the delimiter needs to go in quote marks. So our fields are separated by a comma, so we just need to put a comma in there, close the quotes, close the bracket, hit enter, and check it out. We can then simply copy this down like any other formula, and like magic, this is now split up across the columns. Now it's worth noting that this is one of Excel's dynamic array formulas. And one of the things about dynamic array formulas is that you can only edit it in the cell that you typed it into. If I was to click somewhere down here amongst my data, notice that the formula is grayed out. You need to go back to the first cell in order to make any changes. So that's an example of how simple it is to use that function when we have a consistent delimiter. But what if we don't? Let's move on to example 2. Now here we have a slightly different scenario. I've got some employees listed in column A, and I want to split these up across the teams that they work in. So Claire needs to go in the sales team, Mary goes into marketing, and Mark goes into HR. Now, one thing to note here is that we don't have consistent delimiters. So if you take a look at this next one where we have Susan, Amber, and Olivia, you can see here that after the name Susan, we have a semicolon. So obviously when somebody was inputting this information, they've made a small typo. And this is going to cause us problems if we try and do text split the same way that we used it in example 1. Let me show you. If we type in text split, again, our text is located in cell A18. Now, if I was just to specify that our delimiter is a comma space, so I'm going to put in quote marks, comma space, and then close the bracket and hit enter, you can see that it works for the first one because the employee names are all separated with a comma space. But if I drag this formula down, again, you can see it works for this one where the delimiter is consistent, but not for the other two because we have semicolons and in this case, a comma space as well. So how can we deal with that using text split? Well, the good news is that text split can handle multiple delimiters. So let's go back up to the formula bar and I'm going to click just here. Now we can add multiple delimiters into the formula. And if we want to use multiple, we need to wrap them in curly brackets. So I'm going to open my first curly bracket. My first delimiter is comma space, that's fine. But then we have another delimiter. Let's open a quote mark of semicolon space and close the quote mark. We need to remember to close off the curly bracket, and this time when we hit enter, we should find that we can copy this down successfully and everything shifts into the correct position. So just remember, if you have multiple delimiters, you can add those into the formula. You just need to make sure they're enclosed within curly brackets or curly braces. Let's take a look at another slightly different example. We've got some names, and 3 of these people have a title at the end of their name. And I want to separate this information into first name, last name, and title. So if I want to separate out the first name and the last name, the delimiter I'm going to use is a space. So let's type in equals text split. Our text is in cell A27. Our column delimiter, we're going to put it in quote marks, is a space. Close the quote, close the curly bracket, hit enter. And if we copy this down, you can see that it's almost got it right, but take a look at the last names. It's including the comma for the ones that have a title. So how do we get rid of that? Well, based on the principle we were discussing in example 2, we can simply jump up to the formula. We can open a curly bracket. Our first delimiter is a space, but our second delimiter is a comma space. Close the quote marks, close the curly bracket, hit enter, and now when we copy this down, we should find that those commas have been removed. So hopefully you're seeing here how much more flexible text split is. Now let's take a look at our 4th example. Here you can see we have some full names and these people have their titles. So we have Mr. Harry Miller, Ms. Claire Lucy, Ms. Jane Martindale, and Mrs. Hannah Smart. Now my boss has said to me, I want you to split these up into first name and last name, but I don't want you to include their title. Now if I was to use text split to do this, let's go for text split again. This is where our text is located, and I'm going to say that we have multiple delimiters here. So I'm going to open a curly bracket. Our first delimiter is going to be dot space. Close the quotes, comma. Our second delimiter is going to be a space. Let's close our curly bracket, close off text split, hit enter, and see what we get. Well, this isn't quite working correctly. It still included the Mr., Ms. and Mrs. So how can we get this to work? Well, what we can do is we can define Mr., Ms. and Mrs. as delimiters themselves. So let's delete everything out and let's start again. I'm going to type in TEXTSPLIT. Here is our text, comma. We're going to open a curly bracket, and our first delimiter is going to be Mr. dot space, close the quotes. Our second delimiter is going to be Ms. dot space, close the quotes. And our third delimiter is going to be Mrs. dot space, close the quotes. And then we have a fourth delimiter, which is simply our space that separates the two names. So we want quotes, space, quotes. Close the curly brace and close TEXTSPLIT. Now notice here, if I copy this down, it pretty much has it correct. We just have the first name and the last name. It's removed the title, but everything's shifted one column along. We have some blank spaces at the beginning here. Now this is where we can use one of the additional TEXTSPLIT options. So if we go back up to the formula bar and click at the end here, I'm going to press comma to move on to the next argument, which is row delimiter. We don't actually need this, so let's press comma again to move on to the next one. This is what we want. Notice there's an option in there to ignore empty cells. So we need to add a true in here, press enter, and now we should find that when we copy this down, everything is exactly as we need it to be. So those are 4 examples of how you can utilize the new TEXTSPLIT function in Excel to split data across columns in a really flexible way. In this lesson, we're going to take a look at 2 other brand new functions in Excel for splitting up text, TEXTBEFORE and TEXTAFTER. And again, these 2 functions were developed to make it a lot easier to split up text that isn't necessarily consistent. Now, I did briefly mention in the last lesson that prior to these new functions being released, in order to split up a lot of text using functions, we would need to use left, right, and mid. For example, if I wanted to split up the employee name, John Smith, I could say equals left. I could choose the text, but then I would have to specify the number of characters from the left-hand side of the cell that I want to extract. Now I could say, okay, so the name John has 4 characters. Let's extract the first 4. Close the bracket, hit enter, and whilst it's correct for the first one, if we were to copy this formula down, because each name doesn't have 4 characters, we get incorrect results. You can see that a lot of these names are being cut off. Now, to get around that with the left function, we used to have to do all kinds of crazy things like add in a find, search for the space, extract everything before, so on and so forth. And whilst extracting characters from the left was reasonably simple to learn, when you wanted to do something like extract the last name, where you had to use the right function, you ended up with a very, very complicated formula. And it was just really awkward and cumbersome to use, and nobody could ever remember the formula. Now, this is where TEXTBEFORE and TEXTAFTER are so much simpler and more helpful. Now, what we want to extract here is we want to extract the first name, the middle initial, and the last name. And notice that some of these names do have middle initials. So for example, Michael K. Brown, Christopher J. Lee, Matthew L. Taylor. Now let's deal with extracting the first name first of all. For this, we're going to use TEXTBEFORE. So let's choose TEXTBEFORE. The text we want to break up is in cell A6. We can then specify the delimiter. So what delimiter splits up the first name, the middle initial, and the last name? Well, it's a space. So we can open some quote marks, add in a space, close the quote marks. Now, if we just close off the bracket there, this formula is going to find the first space from the left-hand side of the cell. So let's hit enter and let's double click to copy down. And you can see here that it's worked for all of those names. This is so much easier than using the left function. So let's now take a look at how we can extract the last name. Now for this, we're going to use TEXTAFTER instead. Our text is in cell A6, comma. What's our delimiter that separates our first name, the middle initial, and the last name? Well, it's a space. We need to put that in quote marks. Now, if we close the bracket just here and press enter, let's double click to copy down. Now you can see it hasn't quite got it right. Wherever the person has a middle initial, it's actually included that middle initial. Because effectively, what this formula is saying is extract everything after the first space. Now, that's absolutely fine for people with just two names, but when it gets to Michael K. Brown, for example, it's finding the first space, which is this space just here, and then extracting everything after that. So we're getting K. Brown. So how do we change this formula to make it work? Well, if we go back up to our text formula, in fact, I'm just going to double click in the cell just here. What we can then do is press comma, and this is where we can choose the instance number. And I'm going to say -1. Now what this is going to do is it's going to start on the right hand side of the cell, and it's going to look backwards through the text string until it finds the first space, and then it's going to extract everything after that. So if we take a look at this first one, it's going to start on the right hand side of the cell. It's going to go backwards till it finds the first space and extract everything after that, which would be Smith. If we take a look at somebody who has a middle initial, again, it's going to start on the right hand side. It's going to go back until it finds the first space and extract everything after that, which in this case would just be Brown. So let's hit enter. Let's double click to copy down, and we should see that we now get the correct result, which is pretty cool. Now, what about if we want to extract the middle initial? This is where it's slightly more complicated, but we can do this by combining text before with text after. So let's come into this cell. We're going to start with text before. We're going to choose our text, comma. Our delimiter is still going to be a space, but this time we're going to look for the second instance. So it's going to start from the left, it's going to look through the text until it finds the second space in the name and extract everything before. Now, if we were just to do that, we're not going to get the correct answer. We're getting an NA error because in this first name, there isn't a second space. We only have one. Now, this would work if I copied this down a bit further. Now, if we look at this, technically, to get this to work, we need to add something to our formula, which then looks for the first space and extracts everything after. So this is where we can combine text before with text after. So we're going to add text after onto the front. Our text is being generated by our text before formula. Let's click at the end. Our delimiter that we're looking for is a space, and we're looking for the first instance. Now, the default is to find the first instance, so we don't have to add the instance number. We can just close the bracket, hit enter, and double click to copy this down. Now, notice that we have a lot of NA errors in here because not everybody has a middle initial. Now, these don't look very tidy, so we can simply deal with those using error handling formula. So because we have NA errors, I'm going to add if NA onto the front here. And we're going to say that if there's no middle initial, we want nothing in the cell, 2 quote marks. Close the bracket, hit enter, and now when we double click to copy this formula down, we have exactly the result that we're looking for. So text after and text before are really flexible functions for extracting different types of data. And believe me, they are a lot simpler than using more complex versions of left, right, and mid. Have a little play around with them, see what you think.
If you're not a subscriber, click down below to subscribe so you get notified about similar videos we upload. To see the full course that this video came from, click over there. And click over there to see more videos from Simon Sez IT.